And the population of South Carolina has been changing very rapidly. A lot of people moving into the state from elsewhere. So what effect that's going to have on the electoral composition of the state is hard to predict at this point, for me anyway. But I'm hopeful that Annie Andrews can win.
Yeah. I heard a lot of old people are
Yeah,
with the
a lot of old people moving in. That's
Yeah.
true.
Okay, we are now at 12:06. We are recording, and John Wiener is going to be the host for today. I mean, he's going to be the facilitator for the day. So, John, I'm turning it
Yeah,
over to you.
thank you, Liz. It's really a great pleasure for me to introduce Stephanie Thomas. Um, she was elected to her post in 2022 to be Connecticut's Secretary of State. She is also the vice chair of the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State, and a member of the executive committee of the National Association of Secretaries of State. Um, as you guys may know, secretaries of state in most states oversee elections and the administration of elections, and they also serve as key advisors to state legislatures on election matters. I've had the good fortune of knowing Stephanie for a number of months and to meet her colleagues in some other states. Um, by the way, Stephanie, I did vote early. It was I have to report that it was painless and very effective. So thank you for organizing.
Excellent.
I've learned from Stephanie and others that administrative matters here have very substantive consequences, and of course these days advisory roles on elections are critically important. So I thought it would be interesting for us to get her views from the front lines, as it were, on what's going on and what we might expect from elections in November. So, Stephanie, a warm welcome. And before you begin, it's our custom to introduce ourselves to you, and it's probably we should. We have quite a few folks today, so let's make these very short. Less than 60 seconds would be really admirable. Liz, you're right on the top of my screen, so why don't you begin?
Okay, my name is Liz Morey. We are all class of 1963, Harvard Radcliffe. I live in the DC area. I'm a California native. I'm a almost completely retired clinical psychologist. I'm very interested in my enslaving ancestors on my father's side, and I love this Zoom. And welcome.
Albert.
I'm Alden Briscoe. I grew up in Lakeville, and get back there. I have missed Christmas only twice in the last 85 years in Lakeville. My father was chair of the Board of Agriculture because he was probably the only Democratic farmer in the state of Connecticut. My mother was president of the local League of Women Voters and the state League of Women Voters, and then later the vice president of the national. Um, uh, in October of 1962, I drove home from Harvard to register to vote, which I did. And then my father and I went to a county fair. And as you can imagine, there were more politicians than people at the fair, including Governor Dempsey. My father introduced me to Governor Dempsey, and he said hello, and then sort of turned away. And my father said, Governor, my son just registered to vote. And an effusive smile went over his face. His arm went around my back and said, God, it's wonderful that you're here. So on. What a great Irish politician. So, anyway.
That's amazing.
Thank you. Albert Meyer. Albert, you're muted.
Yeah. I muted myself in response to the feedback we were getting before, just in case I was the culprit.
Okay.
Yes, I've been this is my second meeting of joining of this Zoom meeting. I'm still trying to understand what it is. I will try to keep it under 60 seconds in contrast to my initial introduction of myself. I've been an MIT professor for 49 years. I've been retired for half a dozen years. I discovered somewhere around 7 or 8 years ago when I first retired that I had an enslaving great-grandfather, which shocked me. Although he did manumit his slave in 1863 when Suriname made slavery illegal. And I also discovered dozens of second cousins lost to the Holocaust in my own genealogical research.
Wow. Okay.
Jeffrey.
Yeah, hi. Jeff Fox, originally from Chicago, now living in Spain. I taught sociology for many years, and mostly my books are mainly on social conditions in various parts of Latin America, and I'm now writing fiction in Spain.
Bill Collins.
Bill Collins, I grew up in the Boston area. After college, Navy 20 years, nuclear power. Ended up in South Carolina working at the Savannah Riverside on nuclear waste cleanup, and have stayed here. So far as I know, not contaminated with the nuclear waste. And so here with my wife.
Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Iskevich, class of 63. As a freshman, I was in mid-Thayer, and as an upperclassman, I was in Leverett House. I spent most of my career with government, first the U.S. Department of Commerce, doing export promotion, and then later with the USAID. Then I worked for state government in Massachusetts, putting together the Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management Plan back in the late 70s. Then I returned to USAID, served in Jordan, Morocco, and Poland for a cumulative of 12 or 13 years, and then did some assignments in Armenia, Yemen, the West Bank, Portugal, Turkey, and did some consulting elsewhere. And I live in Watertown, Mass.
Thank you. Thank you. Ron.
I live next to Watertown, Mass, in Newton, Massachusetts. A week after graduation, went to work for WGBH. I've been in film and television and making videos ever since. Now I'm doing it as a volunteer, and even working on a video today.
Rich.
Richard Rothstein. Hi, I'm a journalist, writer, focused mostly on race and education. And well, that's less than 60 seconds. Hello.
Thank you. Jerry.
Jerry?
Yeah.
Jerry Sekendi in Pasadena, California, environmental lawyer specializing in water quality. A couple of years in the Peace Corps in Cusco, Peru. Then I just joined the Department of Justice under Johnson. Nixon came in and I left. I thought things were horrible. Not anything compared to what it is today. That's for damn sure. So worked for an oil company, worked for the state as the vice chair of the State Water Resources Control Board, and I'm semi-retired.
David L.
Muted, David.
So I'm in New York City. I'm from New York City, but in between, I lived in many places, mostly India. I'm a historian of Muslims in India, and have taught in various places, the longest time at the University of Minnesota, but I left and went on to other places as well. And I'm very concerned about the success of voting. And by the way, these issues exist in India in very similar ways.
John, one of you.
Hi, John Woodford. I grew up on Lake Michigan, across the lake from Chicago in Benton Harbor. And then after college, I've mainly been involved in writing and editing for places ranging from Muhammad Speaks to New York Times, but most of the time at the University of Michigan.
Thank you. Ann?
Hi, I'm Ann Groves. I currently from Oakland, California, originally from New York City, Lower East Side. I've been active in politics pretty much all my life, always working on the left, and I've never seen anything quite like what's going on today. So I've vowed that I'm going to spend from today to November making this my full-time job, and I'm looking for ideas about how to be most effective.
Thank you. Roger?
Hi, Stephanie. Roger Phillimore from Galway, Ireland. Just an observer in this wonderful group of inspiring people. And just to say, I volunteered on the McGovern campaign on my first trip to the US in '72, and have followed your destiny ever since.
Thank you. Jack?
Yeah, I'm live in New York. I'm a sociologist, retired after 46 years from the City University. I'm pretty new to this group and learning today that I have in common time in the Peace Corps in Peru at I presume exactly the same time as Jerry, right after graduation. And I have a number of enslaving ancestors in North Carolina on my mother's side and in Barbados, Rhode Island, and Connecticut on my father's side. I don't spend too much time guilt tripping myself about that, but I do spend time as a fairly active member of Democratic Socialists of America and doing research on degrowing the medical care system.
David O.
Born in Boston, grew up in Central and South America. Came to Andover, and which is where Jerry and I met. And I think that's my phone. Hold on.
Skip to someone else.
Bob? Okay.
Got it. And spent most of my career in public broadcasting, public radio and public television, and first in New York City at WNET, and most recent, and for many, many years here in Philadelphia, where we live now at WHYY.
Thank you. Bob Hoge.
So I'm a native New Yorker, still live there, career in banking and investment banking and finance. I've spent most of my time in the last several years working in volunteer capacity for several environmental NGOs. John and I see a fair bit of each other. Includes walking our dogs in Central Park. About a year and a half ago, in the course of a dog walking conversation, we formed the idea of starting a giving circle to raise money for the ACLU. Long story short, we wound up raising $250,000, most of which devoted to civil rights and civil liberties causes, and that in turn has led to principally John's involvement and my wife's and his wife's involvement with the DSSA.
Thank you. Cindy? You're muted.
Cindy, you're muted.
Muted.
Okay, am I all right now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, nothing. Not much from me. I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, class of '63, Peace Corps in Turkey. Then shortly after, I fetched up in Italy, and I've lived here since 1970. I live in Radda in Chianti, where we have vineyards. And, I'm just here. That's it.
Thank you. George?
George Jones, Ann Arbor, Michigan.
That was real fast.
Good work.
Hampton Howell, class of '63. In my wild youth, I was a preppy, and I was an athlete in squash and tennis. And then I facing the draft after graduating from Harvard in '63, I learned a lot about Vietnam, and I started protesting the war because I was indignant about it. And I've lived in Roxbury, Mass, for 3 years, and Brazil and Puerto Rico, and in my sober elderhood, I've been a clinical psychologist in Nashville, Tennessee, for now 30 years.
Fred.
Fred Gardner. I've been a political organizer and a writer, and I've been through periods of disdain for electoral politics, but now I'm back into it. So I'm a short tail relative of Ellen Scalator, and I'm looking forward to your presentation.
You and me both, Fred.
Marcy, I don't know if you hear us or if you.
Marcy hears us, but
okay, all right.
It looks like she's muted.
Okay,
And has turned off her camera.
Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Her voice too.
Stephanie, thank you, guys. Stephanie, the floor is yours indeed.
Well, thank you. First of all, John, for inviting me to participate. For everyone else, we met in the ballroom after breakfast for a really good cause. And anyone who knew the acronym for the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency tasked with cyber for elections, he had me at hello in the acronym. And just listening to this group, I can talk to you forever. Just by way of like background bona fides, I'm from New Jersey. I went to New York University. I was a sociology major. Fun fact, I hear nuclear powered. My uncle, my great uncle, worked on the first nuclear powered submarine here in Connecticut, the Nautilus. I heard MIT. I am part of right now working with Professor Charles Stewart with a wide range of election officials on some research in the field at MIT. I went to Ireland for the first time last year. It's fantastic. Jerry, I spend all my time thinking about the DOJ right now and why it's not great. And Anne, I will be happy to give you ideas after this call. Email me. So I want to set the stage for today. There is a battle of, it feels like the fight for Middle Earth that is playing out right now. The results are going to be felt very far into the future. It's going to impact the 2028 elections. It's going to impact redistricting after the 2030 census. And while most people are really paying attention to the midterms in terms of the fight for Congress, this epic battle is playing out in Secretary of the State races across the country. There are 26 secretaries out of the 50 on the ballot this year, and 13 are Democrats and 13 are Republicans. But 26, I'm sure you're good at math, that's more than half the secretaries. But many of those positions are the results of open seats or secretaries running for a different office, etc. So what that means for America is that after the midterm elections, we will have 17 brand spanking new secretaries of state. That is over a third. That has the potential to drastically reshape like how secretaries work. We are even concerned about it in the National Association of Secretaries with so many new members. Does it change the very nonpartisan stance that we have taken over the last 100 years? So speaking of nonpartisan, I am constantly wearing many, many hats. I am Stephanie Thomas, candidate on the ballot this year for Secretary of State. I am the current Secretary of the State, which is 100% nonpartisan, and I take that very seriously. Today, I'm speaking to you as the vice chair of the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State, which by its very nature is partisan. So our conversation may become more partisan, but please know when I'm speaking in my official capacity and when I am doing my work, it is very nonpartisan. But the fact that 17 new secretaries are coming in has not really garnered much attention. I think the media has not talked about it at all. And most people haven't really thought about what it could mean for the franchise. And I think that's because most people have no idea what secretaries of the state do. And I don't blame them because it does vary from state to state. In Maine, for example, the secretary handles their Department of Motor Vehicles. In North Carolina, for example, the secretary does not handle elections. In Washington, D.C., they're also a liaison to ambassadors. So, and then some states don't have a secretary, like in Utah and New Jersey, the secretary functions are handled by the lieutenant governor. So it makes it kind of difficult to pin down, but most of us do cover elections. And when I think about what's been playing out over the last year and a half via this new administration, most of the damage is not being done by the legislative branch. But when I look at what the public is focused on, it's largely the Save America Act, and everyone is rightly concerned about that, fighting against it. They're also looking at the Supreme Court cases, like the redistricting case or Watson versus the Republican National Committee about the postmark acceptance of ballots after Election Day. But secretaries of state have a lot of wiggle room, a lot of the procedures that we control are flying under the radar, and a lot of the harm is coming through the executive branch. So just to give you a slight example. So if we look at, I think everyone knows that the Department of Justice has requested the unredacted voter rolls from all the states. And it's always in the news. Connecticut just won our case last Friday. It's already been appealed. But the DOJ has lost 17 cases. They haven't won any. And people are very happy about that. But what hasn't been reported is that 16 states sent their unredacted voter files, no questions asked. Those 16 states represent 70 million voters. That's 34% of the total number of registered voters in the United States. A lot of people also haven't paid attention to not the SAVE Act, but the SAVE program. This is the program that is run through the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, and it's been around for a very long time. And states have always used it to check eligibility for benefits because it tracks people who have been naturalized, people here under refugee status, DACA, temporary permanent status. All of those people are tracked through immigration services. But what the new administration has asked is that every state run its list against this system of databases, and then anyone who cannot be conclusively proven to be a citizenship has to go back to the states to figure out if they are or not. And many, many secretaries, again, no questions asked, sent their voter files, and they have been run through USCIS, and that represents 33 million voters. And the reason many states like Connecticut did not send those files is because no guarantees were given about what is being done with that data. And as time evolved from the first request to now, they have actually said that they could send that data to any other federal agency and it can be used in any way. And these are decisions that secretaries were able to make without any input from others in their state. In 2024, we saw a lot of secretary decisions playing out in the courts. I remember it was Alabama and Virginia, for example, who tried to remove thousands of people from their voter rolls. And if you watch the news coverage, the language is always likely non-citizen or suspected non-citizen. So states have been trying to kick those people off the voter rolls, but what we have found through some of the court cases and over time is that many of those suspected or likely non-citizens turned out to be American citizens. And then if you flip on the other side, secretaries have a lot of sway in how what laws are passed because like here in Connecticut, we finally, for the first time, have universal access to absentee ballots. And that is in part because my office worked very closely with advocates and legislators to get us to a point of accepting a law that we could all live with. You'll see Democratic secretaries working to always balance voter access with election integrity. So I bring that up because there are many, many threats right now to our elections. We definitely need to continue watching the Save America Act. We know that President Trump has made this one of his primary goals. He has tried every trick in the book, such as threatening not to sign legislation, to his press conference a week and a half ago, talking about how our elections are in great jeopardy unless we pass the Save America Act. But we know that just based on math, that it will disenfranchise many more Americans than surface actual non-citizens registered and voting on the voter rolls. Cybersecurity has been weakened tremendously. The agency that is tasked with, or was tasked with providing the states with threat intelligence, information about foreign malign influence. They got doged way back in like February of 2025, losing, I believe it was over 300 employees. As a secretary in an election cycle like this in 2024, we would have received many briefings by now on the operations of China, Russia, Iran, what's happening, what we can do to help protect against it. But we have received no such information this year. Further, the entity that is tasked with helping states with incident response, such as like DDoS attacks on system networks, looking at incursions, like in 2024, Iran hacked the Arizona Secretary of the State. Nothing to do with voters, but they hacked their website and replaced his face, his photo with a photo of the Ayatollah. But little things like that happen, as anyone knows, in this cyber environment. And the entity that used to provide these services to help states respond, it used to be provided through the federal government, but it has, in essence, been privatized, forcing states to pay for these costs on through the same entity that the federal government used to pay. So in a state like Connecticut, we are paying that fee, so we are still covered, but that is not true for every jurisdiction around the United States, creating quite a gap in an area where a lot of states don't have deep-seated expertise. We know there is a massive threat to mail-in voting, including all the recent cases around Trump's executive order, and there's a Supreme Court case related to whether or not the post office, the goal right now is for the post office to create a list of valid citizens entitled to receive a mail ballot. And if anything is mailed through the post office by a person not on that list, they will not be allowed to deliver that ballot. Um, Other than the fact that I don't know if I want the post office responsible for like voter lists. That is fighting a lot of court cases right now, and I expect more to come. Um, of course, there are other efforts underway trying to get the unredacted voter files, including holding hostage funding that would typically be offered through Homeland Security for law enforcement and emergency services grants. We in the election community are worried about the seizure of ballots, equipment, or other election materials. Many people are worried about some show of intimidation or force at the polls, whether it's through ICE enforcement or other means. And then there's little things that are also been percolating, but most people aren't really paying attention to. The Election Assistance Commission is the only real election entity at the federal level that has always been focused on election administration and making sure that holes are filled that we are seeing on a nationwide basis, such as a shortage of poll workers. So they'll come up with a grant program so states can pioneer new programs, etc. They track data across all states about various things related to voting. They also certify all election equipment, and they also certify the testing labs that test that equipment. In case you missed it, the president fired there are four commissioners who, two Democrats, two Republicans who run that entity. One resigned, the two Democrats were fired, and the fourth, the Republican, was allowed to resign a few weeks ago. So now, although the work can continue through staff, no new decisions can be made without the board impaneled.
Oh, God.
Yeah, also kind of under the radar is the new Civics Commission that Linda McMahon is running. Because secretaries run elections, many of us are very civic education, civic engagement forward, trying to teach people how government works, how they can get involved, and also how they can exercise their right to vote. And the administration has started a new civics advisory board that is made up of a very conservative leaning panel of 40 organizations, and their mandate is to roll out civic education in all schools across America. But many of us are concerned based on the makeup of the group, the advisory group, like what that civic education will entail. And those are some of the highlights. There are a lot of other concerns. And many of us, but I will say it sounds very bleak, but the positive out of it is that more people are working together than ever before. There are, I would say, a loose consortium of nonpartisan advocacy groups, voting rights groups, attorneys general, secretaries of state, who are more coordinated on what is happening in some jurisdictions, what could possibly happen, and how we would respond to that. And I do think it's that greater coordination that has led to many of our legal winnings, etc., because states, for the first time in a long time, were able to coordinate very quickly and file very immediate lawsuits, a lot of amicus briefs on some issues, etc. So we do tabletops together, we do scenario planning together. And so that does give me hope for the future. And I'm going to keep this brief so I can answer questions, but I'll just wrap up by saying two things, which is that I every person who's elected is allowed to have policy viewpoints, right? Like this Congress can decide on what policies they want to see enacted. The flip side of that is every American has the right to use the First Amendment to voice their opposition, their support, and we have many, many conduits for people to intersect with government. However, most of these efforts are not coming through the legislative branch. They are actually coming through the executive branch. They are often not following the Constitution, which courts have borne out, which does delegate the time, manner, and place of election to the states. They are not following proper rule of law procedures. Many of my Republican colleagues, for example, also push back against the DOJ case asking for voter file information simply because their state laws would have precluded them from sending this information, and they did not like that the federal government was asking them to break state law. So the same thing is true regardless of who is rolling out the policy. When it comes to elections, you have to provide time to create the regulations and the procedures around laws. Laws are not specific enough for election administration. You have to have time to train the workforce, and you have to have the resources to educate the public, to prepare them. When we look at something like Real ID, when it was rolling out in the United States, after 10 years, people still hadn't adopted it in the manner that the federal government wanted. And that was a very well-funded, well-advertised program. So much of the resistance to many of this administration's efforts, other than beyond the attack on the rule of law, has to do with the fact that many of these provisions would become immediately enacted. And that is a formula not for making elections more secure, but for making them less secure. So I'll stop there because I know most people sort of have a category of questions, but I'm happy to answer them. And thank you for listening.
Stephanie, thank you very much. Ron, you have your hand up first, I think so.
Okay. A couple of things. You said that many states were supine and turned over their voter rolls. Presumably, they would get back information on whom to purge. Now, couldn't they purge them selectively? Oh, we're going to purge Democrats and not Republicans in this state. and that could make all the difference. I mean, a couple of percent here, a couple of percent there can turn a win into a loss or a loss into a win. So I'm just wondering about that. And just one basic second question. Are you terrified, and should we be terrified, or are you relatively confident that come November 4th, 5th, 6th, we'll have had fair elections across the country? So there's basically two questions.
Yeah, good questions. The first question, yes, absolutely. For the people who ran their list against the SAFE program run by USCIS, there are no requirements about what to do after the list comes back. We know that 1 to 2% have come back as inconclusive. But every state has different laws, and I don't think most would have laws that address that delta. So a well-meaning secretary could definitely then instruct their locals to make calls, talk to all these people, make sure it's all squared away. But others could just say, hey, we're taking these people off. There are no protections. But a bigger concern, I won't say bigger, but a concern by the states also is at the time this was all being requested, you may recall there was an incident where when Doge was at the Social Security Administration, there was a data breach. So the concern is that if the federal government has all of this data, like real data, it's like living in a file somewhere, an Excel spreadsheet, and there's a data leak, or the Russians get a hold of it. The bigger concern has to do with misinformation campaigns, knowing exactly who to target with what. Disinformation is a big business right now. We know Russia, China, and Iran ran disinformation campaigns in 2024. We know some of their methodologies. I just don't recall if that's been declassified, so I won't say more about it. Um, but we know this happened. So being able to target people very specifically is worrisome. And then your second question, I was no fun at cocktail parties last year because people would say, "Is it as bad as I think it is?" And I would say, "It's so much worse." I, 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 I am, I won't say I'm a worrier, but part of my work, right, is to plan for the worst case scenario. That's what election officials do. Um, the courts have held longer than I thought they would at the beginning of this. Um, and I do feel that there are a lot of secretaries on both sides of the aisle who believe very heavily in their when they raise their hand to not only uphold the US Constitution, but their state constitutions, and they take that role very seriously. So for 2026, I feel like something will happen, but there will be a network to guard against it. And because it's so decentralized, it doesn't have to happen everywhere. All you need is one little thing here, one little thing there. But I think we have a good rapid response system in place. I worry about future elections. I worry about this new landscape of 17 new secretaries. Just to give you an example, two of my colleagues, who I think have done very good work, when they were elected in 2022, they were the election denier candidates. But like many people who are on the campaign trail, who talk a lot, once they got in and saw how things worked, they softened some of their positions, but they have just lost their primaries to people more extreme. many of my colleagues who had been secretaries, like the Brad Raffensperger types who, were like election wonks and nerds, came up through the ranks, like really believe in like good systems. They're all either retiring because they're getting so harangued, or they're being beat by challenges to their right, or they're unable to say or do much for fear of one of those things. So the environment, when 17 newcomers come in, it makes up such a large group of the new of the secretary community. I don't know how things will shift between now and 2028. And then, of course, with the census in 2030.
Thanks.
Jeff.
Okay, I don't really have a clearly formulated question, but I great appreciation for your revealing how much of the undermining of our constitutional system is going on below our usual viewpoint. We don't, most of us don't ever know that this stuff is going on. And I hope there's a way that we can keep abreast of it. And I don't know if secretaries of state have, if you have a blog or a newsletter or something, but this is clearly much more important and things that at least I had never been aware of. So thank you.
Yeah, let me give everyone just a few helpful hints. The Democratic Association of Secretaries of State does send out a monthly kind of update on the landscape, and that's where you'll see. So we're trying to protect four key states: Michigan, which is an open seat, and then Arizona, Nevada, and Minnesota, which are Democratic incumbents. And part of that protectionism is if we lose Democratic secretaries in all the swing states, then the electoral college math in 28 becomes problematic if the Republicans who've replaced them are of the voter file purge variety. So that's one thing you can do. The Brennan Center has been doing a lot through their election security group, putting out papers on all of these topics. And third, the best way to keep up, I find myself, I have a Google alert set up on the words election, voting, and like some other term, Secretary of State. And then every day I just get emails and I scan them for what's going on nationally. I do warn people that I think the undermining of our election will never be one big thing like the Save America Act. It doesn't need to be. It You can kind of choose with laser precision which races you need to affect the outcomes of. And you can do different things. Maybe in Detroit, it's ICE. Maybe it's a disinformation campaign in Arizona. And maybe it's something else somewhere else. So that is why it is, I think, important to stay on top of not only the issues, but what secretaries have within their sway.
Wow, thanks.
Don?
Generally speaking, would you say that to thwart the people who want to corrupt the elections process, is it a better tactic to encourage people to vote in person? I mean, in other words, do they have a chance at screwing things up if we mail them in, if we lined up and went through the voting process? Would that be a better tactic?
It depends on the state. We don't necessarily think in person is as necessary as early. So depending on the state, some states are all mail-in voting, for example, like Oregon. There are 8 states that are only vote by mail. A state like Connecticut, we have the ability to vote by mail or drop off at a drop box or go in person early. So I would encourage people to go early, mainly because if you don't know when people are voting and how they voted, if they've already voted, etc., it's just harder to disrupt the system. Or if something is done on election day, more ballots will have already been cast.
What does early mean?
So most states, except two, have an option to vote prior to election day. Here in Connecticut, we have for general elections 14 days, including weekends, some evenings, where it's like election day in that you go and feed your ballot into the tabulator. But here in Connecticut, like every town has one or two locations. Uh, Other states have different laws, but in most states in America, you can begin voting in some capacity, like 31 days before the election.
Thanks.
Ham?
Yeah, 2 points. One is I was a little bit complacent and even contemptuous about our system until it got under all this threat, and now I cherish it deeply, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and anybody in this kind of position who is sincerely trying to enforce the rules.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Secondly, I've understood that I think I've confabulated two things, but I'm asking your help in it. One is that anybody can buy voter roll, something like voter rolls from most states, and so what's the big deal about Russia or China buying them? But can you set me straight about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually a good distinction because when the president gave his press conference a week and a half ago about the declassified data about China having the voter rolls, there has been documentation of many bad actors having the voter rolls, but no evidence that they've ever had anything more than the publicly available voter rolls, a fact he left out. So the voter roll in, I believe, every state in the country, if not every, most, is available for purchase. This is how a lot of companies who are marketing to you get your address, and that's why you get all these low cards in the mail. Every state has different laws about like what type of government entities, commercial entities, etc., how the list can be used. Like you can't buy it for the purpose of harassment, like these types of things. I think the cheapest voter file is something like $200 or $300. The most expensive I've ever heard of are states charging $25,000. So it varies widely. What the Department of Justice and USCIS are seeking, however, is not the public version of the voter file. They're asking for all the information in the voter file. Most of that, not most, some of that would be redacted when it's sold for the obvious reasons. Like in the public version, you wouldn't get like a full birth date. You might get month and year. In the public file, you're not getting the last four of the social security number. In the public file, you're not getting at all someone's driver's license number. So it's the fact that all the information is being requested with no countervening safeguards or guarantees in place. In fact, the states want to have the best list possible. So we were all not all, certain secretaries were invited to meet with White House staff last July or June. And I went along with many others. And one of the questions that came up in the room was, hey, we love the fact that the SAVE program exists. Even though it's not perfect, if we have doubts about people on our voter file, we would love to be able to run our names through it. And that, in fact, is what many states had been doing for about 10 years prior to now. But the difference was the states controlled the data. So a state could go in, type in a name, see how it came back, and deal with it on their own. What everyone is objecting to, because it is against most of our state laws, is sending all of that data to unmasked. It's like an Excel file, sending it and having it be shared anywhere without any control. So that is where it is problematic.
Rich?
Yeah, just a numeric question. I'm sure you've thought about this. Of the 17 new secretaries of state, how many are likely to be MAGA? And of the incumbent Democrats who are running for re-election, how many have a chance of losing? In other words, what is your projection? I know it's not certain, but what is your projection of how many, it's now 26, how many of the secretaries of state after the current election will be Democratic?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think so right now, Democrats are in the minority of secretaries. They're more Republican than Democratic by 2 or 3. So 13 Republicans, 13 Democrats. The incumbent seats, like our main concerns, Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, Minnesota. And then we have some pickup opportunities in Georgia, Iowa, Ohio, and maybe Indiana. A lot of it comes down to money, right? And we don't know yet how much money all of these candidates have raised, because sometimes the more money you have, the better your chances. Arizona narrowly won last cycle. And just to give you guys, most people don't know how much secretary races cost. Here in Connecticut, we have one of the best public campaign finance programs in the country. I only have to raise $100,000. Then I get a grant from the state to run my campaign. That's unusual. In Michigan, and I don't know how much she raised in total. Actually, I do know. I think she had to spend 21 million to win in Michigan. In Arizona, to get the first Democrat in 32 years, they raised about 9 million. And like DAS, the Democratic Association, played a huge role in giving those key states money so that Democrats could win them for the first time in a long time. So it remains to be seen who outspends whom. And because many of them are open seats, we don't know how these newcomers are going to fare. So all of that is a long-winded way of saying I don't have a prediction. And I don't think the playing field is always apples to apples, because we also don't know how some secretaries are handling their voter files after running their lists through these systems. So it is very murky at the moment, but I would expect I would expect that we might keep our parity right now of more Republicans than Democrats. But I do think funding changes that, because some of those races are just tough.
Jack, last question because we're
Yeah,
running.
the two things. One is you mentioned the Brennan Center, and I would like to underline that. I don't represent them. I have no connection with them except as a donor, but they are doing really very, very good work. Their reports on the various lawsuits going on and the education of election workers and so forth. They're doing a great job. I will put their address in the chat when I finish speaking. But my question is about election denial. Do you have the sense that, particularly at the level of elected officials and people running for Secretary of State and so forth, is it just purely cynical? They're trying to cheat so that they can get the partisan advantage? Or is there any kind of more explanation for the positions that they take that doesn't presume bad faith? I mean, are there some flaws in the system that allow them to conclude that the elections are being mishandled?
Um, there definitely has not been any evidence that would ever suggest that any inherent flaws in the system would change federal election outcomes, right? That has been tested, searched, etc. There is also a lot of data suggesting that more Americans would be disenfranchised than non-citizen voters potentially found, again, based on many states have done exhaustive searches of their files, etc. There appears to be a disingenuous nature behind all of this. Just 2 weeks ago, Idaho, for example, all secretaries got sort of a threatening letter from the DOJ reminding us that we can be found criminally negligible and like they have the hammer over our head. And the Idaho Attorney General, it's in the news, like famously sent back a letter like, why don't you try not threatening your friends? Because a year ago, we did run our data for our voter file through USCIS. We did find 15 people that we had questions about, and we sent you those names asking you to look into it, and we haven't heard anything since. So if election security is your actual goal, like, why don't you spend your time helping us figure out these 15 people than threatening us? And I would say that's not isolated, right? A lot of it is just talk, which is why, versus like, there are many ways to do all to try to solve all of these problems, but the Save America Act isn't one of them, right? And that's what's being pushed. So, um, that's why most people just feel it's a ploy to get ahead of the curve to um, call into question any election results that the current majority party does not want to be certified or validated.
Well, Stephanie, on that note, a big thank you. I'm sorry that we have to end this conversation, but thank you ever so much, and I do hope you keep out of jail.
I do too.
Yeah.
So that
It's been enlightening. Thanks very much.
So that you can continue your good work. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And please don't hesitate if, like, in your debrief, you find you want some links or some websites or something, just let me know and I'll get it to Elizabeth.
Okay, fine. How do we reach you?
You can reach me. I'll put it in the chat. The best thing is info@votestephaniethomas.com.
Thank you.
Okay, well,
You're
thanks
quite
again.
welcome. Be well. Thank you again.
Yeah,
Always
thank
a
you
pleasure,
so much.
John. Bye.
What a pleasure. Yeah. Okay, thanks everybody, and I will this will be okay. The computer will take the recording as soon as we all get off, and hopefully relatively soon I'll be able to upload it to the YouTube channel. So thank you so much again. And John, wherever you are you still on? Yeah, just thank you so much for inviting Stephanie. I mean, this was just absolutely
Excellent.
Yeah,
That's great.
thanks.
really
Yeah.
Okay.
I can send a note to everybody about the YouTube channel and its
good.
address.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Hey,
Everyone. Bye.
Bye, Marcy.
bye, Marcy.